Hey everyone, welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping right into what I'd argue is literally the single most transformative decade in all of video game history, the 1990s. This was the era that completely rewired an entire industry, taking us from a market fighting over flat, two-dimensional pixels to one exploring massive, fully realized 3D cinematic landscapes. The technology was moving at lightning speed, but man, the corporate drama, that moved even faster.
So here's our roadmap for this explainer. We're going to track this massive technological disruption chronologically. We'll hit 1. The fierce 16-bit war. 2. Clunky multimedia CD experiments. 3. The 3D revolution begins. 4. Sega's tragic downfall. And finally, 5. The decade's enduring legacy. All right, let's get into it.
Starting off with Section 1, the fierce 16-bit war.
Picture the early 90s. The industry is locked in this ultimate corporate duopoly, literally fighting for total control of your living room. Just look at this incredible contrast in strategies. On one side, the Sega Genesis sold itself on pure, unfiltered, in-your-face attitude. They pushed a mascot in Sonic the Hedgehog who was specifically designed to showcase the console's speed, and they blasted consumers with edgy marketing terms like blast processing. On the flip side, Nintendo didn't really need the edge because they had undeniable technological superiority with the Super Nintendo. We're talking Mode 7 graphics for 3D-like rotation, a massive palette of over 32,000 colors, and an incredibly rich Sony SP700 sound chip. Ultimately, the SNES's tech and its deep library of RPGs and platformers won out globally. They sold over 49 million units to Sega's 31 million. But the battle for North America early on, that was a totally different story.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how this single, brilliantly aggressive marketing campaign changed absolutely everything. Tom Kalinske, the CEO over at Sega of America, knew he had to target older gamers to break Nintendo's stranglehold. So the gloves came off. By leaning hard into this punchy slogan, Sega actually snatched the North American market lead right out from under Nintendo by Christmas of 1991.
Moving right along to Section 2. Clunky multimedia CD experiments.
So as the industry kind of figured out that optical CD-ROMs were the future, we hit this awkward transition period around 1992 and 1993. It was basically the awkward teenage years of gaming, where almost nobody knew how to build a cohesive product around CDs. Case in point, $699. Yep, that was the launch price of the Panasonic 3DO in 1993. Designed by EA founder Trip Hawkins, the 3DO was this incredibly ambitious idea for an open hardware platform. But at nearly $700, that was just financially absurd for the average gamer. It perfectly illustrates why these early, highly ambitious CD consoles completely failed to capture the mass market, with the 3DO moving only about 2 million units before being rendered entirely obsolete.
And you know, the 3DO definitely wasn't alone in this chaos. Just look at this timeline. In just a few short years between 1993 and 1995, the hardware market became incredibly crowded, confusing, and completely fragmented. You had the 3DO, the 32-bit Atari Jaguar, which, remember, claimed to be 64-bit, the Sega 32X, the Sony PlayStation, and then Nintendo's infamous, headache-inducing Virtual Boy, all dropping one right after another. Consumers were literally paralyzed by choice.
And this brilliantly illustrates just how desperate Sega got to keep the Genesis relevant. They reached the absolute peak of hardware confusion. First, you buy the Genesis. Step 2, you add the Sega CD base. Step 3, you literally stack the Sega 32X right on top of it. You ended up with this wildly expensive, unwieldy Frankenstein tower that required multiple power outlets just to turn on. It was a totally directionless hardware strategy that angered retailers and utterly confused consumers, especially since the 32X only ended up with a tiny fractured library of just 40 games. Just a mess.
Which brings us to a major turning point. Section 3. The 3D revolution begins.
As the industry finally transitioned from those flat 2D environments into fully realized 3D polygons, Sega was ready to launch their true next-generation console, the Sega Saturn. But at E3 1995, Sega of America made an absolutely catastrophic mistake. They announced a surprise, immediate launch in the US, 4 months ahead of schedule, for $399. Well, major retail chains who were completely left out of this surprise drop were absolutely infuriated. Some literally refused to support Sega altogether after that. So Sega essentially kneecapped their own platform on day one.
Which left the door wide open for what is arguably the greatest mic drop moment in gaming history at that exact same E3. Sony's Steve Race casually walks up to the podium, says one single word, $299, and just walks right off. Bam! That was the price of the brand new Sony PlayStation. Sony undercut Sega perfectly.
You combine that kind of aggressive pricing with a super developer-friendly CD-ROM architecture, and Sony just scooped up massive third-party support. That paved the way for legendary franchises like Final Fantasy and Metal Gear Solid to define a whole generation.
Now, Nintendo's counterattack came a bit later in 1996 with the N64, and let's be real, it was revolutionary in its own right. Super Mario 64 literally redefined how games handle 3D space, and the console pioneered features we take as absolute standard today like analog sticks and rumble feedback. But they made one fatal flaw. Actually, it was massive: sticking to the cartridge format. Cartridges severely limited the storage space needed for cinematic audio and video, driving major third-party developers right into Sony's open arms. The N64's library maxed out at just 387 games, which was completely dwarfed by the PlayStation's massive 2,400-plus titles.
All right, moving into the late 90s with Section 4, Sega's tragic downfall.
Okay, let's dive into this, because looking at the fallout of these late 90s decisions brings us to a really heartbreaking chapter. The Sega Dreamcast was a genuine technological masterpiece. I mean, it was a massive leap forward. Powered by a highly capable Hitachi SH4 CPU, it pioneered built-in console online play with a 56K modem, and it featured the incredibly innovative visual memory unit, a memory card with its own actual screen and controls. The hype for this was off the charts, leading to a record-breaking $98.4 million in first-day sales in North America.
So with such a massive launch and universally beloved games like Crazy Taxi and Soul Calibur, what went wrong? Why did it fail? Ultimately, it came down to two insurmountable roadblocks. First, Sega's severely damaged brand reputation. After the whole 32X and Saturn debacle, consumers and retailers were highly skeptical of Sega's long-term commitment. And second, the looming hype of the upcoming PlayStation 2. The PS2, importantly, doubled as a DVD player, casting this massive shadow that Sega just couldn't escape. Forced into a financial corner, Sega had to discontinue the Dreamcast by March 2001, exiting the hardware business permanently. Just a brutal end.
Which takes us to our final wrap-up, Section 5, the decade's enduring legacy.
So, the crucial point is right here in the numbers. When the dust finally settled on the 5th generation, it painted a stunning picture. The Sony PlayStation utterly dominated with over 102 million units sold globally. That is wild. The Nintendo 64 trailed at a distant 33 million, and the poor Sega Saturn lagged way behind at just 9 million. A completely new player to the industry hadn't just competed, they had fundamentally conquered the market by understanding exactly what developers and older consumers actually wanted.
This entire shift, from cartridges to CDs, from flat 2D sprites to 3D polygons, it fundamentally changed what video games could even aspire to be. The industry heavily rewarded those who adapted, and it ruthlessly punished those who didn't. The 90s proved without a doubt that corporate hubris has a price, and literally no giant is safe from technological disruption. Looking at the landscape today, with all the continuous shifts in how we play and stream media, you really have to wonder, who will be the next gaming titan to fall? Thanks for hanging out and exploring this incredible slice of history with me. Keep questioning everything, and I'll see you on the next Explainer.